Are you serious?
Yes. Yes, I am.
That's a serious comment.
Do I not seem like a serious person?
We get that Black Americans are FBAs. Black American is an ethnic group. We get that.
Oh, you do? Oh, I get where the confusion comes in.
Within the delineation conversation between FBAs and Black Americans, between FBAs and Black Americans.
Yeah, the way you worded that made it seem like you didn't know that we were one and the same. But go off.
Right? But intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a black woman who discusses black women in her studies, in her articles. She literally talked about how white tea supremacy marginalizes black women, especially black men, in other movements because our needs, our intersectional needs, as black people first, that's what y'all like, right? As black people first, and as our gender, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm well aware of Kimberly Crenshaw and other people like her who may or may not have been well meaning, but whose work have been used to fragment Black empowerment movements. But we'll touch on her work, theory, because that's all it is, a theory, in just a bit.
Because we know black men and black women have two separate experiences.
That's debatable, but okay. Go ahead.
They have two separate experiences. So, therefore, right, she coined the term because when black women were trying to, be part of the feminist movements and the civil rights movements, both movements said your needs as a black woman are too difficult to address.
That's false. The civil rights movement was fighting for equality for all Black people, regardless of the situation. But I'll touch on that a little bit more when I start touching on the intersectionality. However, when you're speaking about the women's suffrage movement, the women's movement, yeah, Black women didn't gain anything from that because they were never meant to. As a matter of fact, let me go here. Let's talk about feminism, shall we? The woman behind me you see there, or whatever it is a person by the name of Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony and the feminist movement, yeah, they kind of showed their ass. And what I mean by that, Frederick Douglass was an avid supporter of the women's movement. Sojourner Truth was actually a part of the women's movement. Her famous speech that, feminists love to run around talking about, Ain't I a Woman? That was actually a critique of the feminist movement and the degendering of black slaves in this country. The repetitive question, Ain't I a woman, was a powerful rhetoric device used to directly challenge the audience and force them to confront the contradictory social norms. She used juxtaposition to directly contrast the experiences of white women with her own, forcing the audience to see the disconnect in the social ideas of the time. Truth used counter arguments to dismantle prejudiced views held by some of her audience, such as using biblical stories of Eve to argue for women's potential for power rather than weakness. Truth speech confronts the prevailing feminist movement for largely ignoring or erasing the experience of black women and for not advocating for their rights as well. She used her own lived experience to challenge the notion that womanhood equated to needing to be helped into carriages or having special treatment. Truth demonstrated her strength by pointing out that she could, quote, carry as much as a man and eat as much too, if I can get it, end quote. She also highlighted the hypocrisy of them not recognizing her pain as a mother when her children were sold away, an experience that contradicted the idea of womanhood being linked to a recognized role as a mother. And not only was this sister a writer for black women, but she was writing for black men too. When Susan B. Anthony asserted that black men shouldn't have the right to vote because white women didn't have the right to vote, yeah, that didn't go over too well. Leaders of the women's suffrage movement, notably Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, were indeed frustrated that the 15th Amendment would grant suffrage based on race but not sex. Their rhetoric became racially charged, arguing that educated white women were more qualified to vote than ignorant black men. They opposed the 15th Amendment because it did not include women. That's when you seen Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass get on code. Frederick Douglass was a strong abolitionist and supporter of women's rights, but he believed the fight for black male suffrage was a matter of life and death, an urgency of the hour. He argued that black men face immediate physical violence and disenfranchisement, making their voting rights a critical priority. He supported the 15th Amendment as a necessary first step, even though he also supported women's suffrage. He very much opposed the idea that black men should be denied the right to vote if white women didn't have it. Now, when it came down to Sojourner Truth, as previously discussed, Sojourner Truth supported the 15th Amendment and did not want to block black men's rights. However, she also voiced concerns that if black women were excluded, a new form of male dominance, including by black men, would emerge. She was against the racially charged arguments of some white suffragists and wanted universal suffrage for all people, using the moment to push for simultaneous inclusion. So even though she did have some critiques, she got on cold when they made it about race and making sure we didn't have it if they didn't. So why do I bring up Susan B. and the women's suffrage movement? Because even in those times, they were trying to fragment the black community because we were getting things passed like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And it's from this movement that birthed the modern day feminist movement that is controlled opposition by the CIA. It goes from Susan B. Anthony to this CIA agent, Gloria Steinem. And if you don't know who she is, you should do some research. But I'll help you out a bit. From 1958 to 1962, Steinem was the director of the Independent Research Service, an organization that was secretly funded by the CIA. Her work involved organizing American youth to attend international youth festivals in Vienna and Helsinki to promote a non communist presence and counter Soviet messaging. And it's interesting because didn't they call all of our revolutionary groups communists? But let's continue. Steinem publicly acknowledged her work with the CIA in 1967, which was reported by newspapers like the Washington Post. She has spoken favorably about her time with the CIA, stating she found the agents liberal and open to the exchange of ideas. Steinem became a predominant figure in the second wave feminist movement in the late 1960s and 70s, co founding Miss Magazine in 1972. So, what's the significance of this? Well, while Susan B. Anthony's tactics didn't work on our good sister Sojourner Truth, old Gloria here had a little bit of better luck. So while you're bringing up Kimberly Crenshaw, who was born in 1959, that means by 69 she was only 10 years old, which means that she missed the civil rights movement there. By 1979, she would have been 20 years old, so any movement that she would have been a part of would have already been infiltrated. And then she wrote her book in 89. But while you're harboring on the fact that she's a black woman who wrote it, Gloria had plenty of black women drinking from the feminist fountain. And it's important to discuss all of these things because this is how you get to intersectionality. And we're going to discuss that in the very next part.
And outside of that,
And we're back for the part two. If you haven't watched the first part yet, go back and watch the first part because it's going to be very important when I break down the reason why intersectionality does not benefit the black community.
she used a lot of case law to seat her theory in actual daily life with black women in corporate.
Why, what a fantastic segue. Let's get into it. I had to go and pull out some of my old notes. Let's get on in here, shall we? Let's find it. Where are you? Where are you? Ah, there you are. You see this? The system of WS, the black unit. Let's get into it. When I explained to you that intersectionality is nothing but feminism on steroids, I'm going to really break it down for you here. You can look at the system of WS as a brick wall, and you can look at the black unit as a wrecking ball. Intersectionality fragments this wrecking ball and makes it impossible to break down the wall of the system of W supremacy. Let's go deeper, shall we? Now let's talk about this intersectionality. When Kimberly first wrote her book, she was actually speaking about the discrimination that black women faces intersectionally in between race and gender. She spoke about legal invisibility of black women in employment and in violent cases. She also spoke about how race and gender combines to produce a unique oppression, not separate issue, but as overlapping systems. And here's why it's so flawed. Because black men has absolutely no control over any of those systems. Black men are just as much as a victim of those systems as black women are. And yes, the oppression might look different from person to person, but it's still oppression nonetheless. You mentioned the issues that women have in the corporate sector. We don't control the corporate sector as black men. As a matter of fact, black women are more in the corporate sector than black men are. You mentioned earlier that black women and black men have different struggles, but they're the same struggles that is implemented by the same system of WS. That was another talking point that came out of the feminist movement, that we don't share the same struggles. This man is now your oppressor, when the truth of the matter is, it's always been this man who's been these people's oppressors. So when you speak about violent cases, understand that that pertains to both the black man and the black woman. Because while the black woman has dealt with more sexual abuse, the black man has been tortured more by way of lynchings and things such as that.
So to say it is a tool of white supremacy, I really think we need to stop drinking the Kool-Aid. It's time to back away from the Kool-Aid.
And now I got to question whether or not you are a foundational black American at all, because we're well studied and we know how these systems are used against us and placed against us. So you said that this is drinking the Kool-Aid. Okay, well, let's break it down further, shall we? I said that intersectionality is nothing but feminism on steroids. And the reason behind that is because one of the first intersections before there was intersectionality was breaking off into what? Feminism, women's issues. And what intersectionality does is take the black unit or the black issues and fragment them into several issues or several situations. It also conditions the black person to say, I'm black and. For example, I'm black and I'm a woman, and I'm a person of color, and I'm LGBTQ queer. And what does this do? It diffuses anything that has to do specifically with black issues, turning our issues into basically people of color issues. It neutralizes collective power by subdividing communities into smaller identity groups, which then promotes symbolic diversity. And this is how they made Kimberly's work more palatable for institutions to teach. Let's dive deeper. The tactic that I just discussed is called shifting the political focus, and this is how they keep black folks permanently disorganized by concentrating and focusing on individual experiences slash harms individual experiences slash harms, individual experiences slash harm, individual experiences slash harms, individual experiences slash harms. You're not fighting the actual system of anti Black racism, namely the system of W supremacy. Thus, intersectionalism, at least as it's used today, is nothing but a bureaucratic sorting tool. And in academia and corporate world, they use it as a moral shield. So instead of addressing things like the racial wealth gap, you get DEI initiatives and symbolic appointments.
because it's something that is against YT supremacy.
We haven't even gotten to the psychological WAR fare that it actually produces. Because the truth is, intersectionality promotes the psychological distance between Black men and Black women. It portrays us as competing victims instead of co survivors of the same system. And the issue with pan Blackness is the fact that it quite literally erases the experiences of a foundational Black American by folding us in with non American diaspora and immigrant groups whose struggles are not rooted in U.S. chattel slavery.
I don't think that y'all realize that. And even with another thing, it's like no one is denying the first thing that you said. Number one, undeniable. Undeniable. I give y'all that. I agree with that. And largely a lot of the conversations that have been had that have surrounded that, I agree with. I agree with it. So I don't understand why it's being repeated to me about what an FBA is, what a Black American is, what the lineage is, and what all of that is.
Well, once again, let me remind you.
Within the delineation conversation between FBAs and Black Americans, between FBAs and Black Americans, between FBAs and Black Americans, I know that. Thank you for being the millionth person to educate me on such a term. Thank you.
And thank you for allowing me to flex my political science muscles. And it may sound like I'm being condescending. I'm not. I promise you I'm not. But there's many people who need to know this information and really dig into it and not just follow it because, they learned it in college or whatever the situation may have you. I was at some of the first intersectionality conferences within the 2000s. I was against it then, and I'm against it now. The notes that I was just reading comes from a paper that I wrote just a few years ago. And for those who would like to know, I aced that paper. Now, I will say, Kimberly Crenshaw may not have expected her work to get taken and basically turned into what it is today. But that matters not because it is what it is today, off of flawed logic. So, no, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm very well studied. It's very important to understand history because if you don't know it, you're doomed to repeat it. And it's also very important to understand, as Neely Fuller Jr. put it so elegantly, the system of W supremacy, what it is and how it operates. Because if you don't understand that, everything that you think you know will only confuse you. W supremacy, like taking both sides of the argument, really all sides of the argument. And this is how you get the government funding extremist groups as well as Black empowerment groups. But if you really want to stir something up, go and check out how many publishing companies were actually funded by the government. And then look at the people who were signed to book deals under those publishing companies. I bring this type of scholarship because our people have been bamboozled, swindled, and hoodwinked way too many times. So knowing the history of these movements are important.